Hi, everybody. I'm Chris. How are you all doing? I'm joining you from Oxford University Press today. I'm in Oxford right now. Where is everyone joining us from? Let us know in the comments below. We have a worldwide community of teachers, and we really love hearing from you. So please do post a comment and let us know whereabouts in the world you are. To tell you a little more about me, I'm responsible for delivering a range of our professional development content to you, including our position papers and our focus papers. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Paul Driver and Sarah Mercer, and they're going to be discussing the topic of learner agency with us. We recently launched a position paper on this topic titled Learner Agency, Maximizing Learner Potential. Paul and Sarah both worked on the paper, and they're going to be answering all your questions about learner agency today. Hi guys, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, thanks. How are you, Paul?
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, very well, thank you. And hello to people in Japan. I can see we've got some people coming in there.
Oh, we've got everyone all over the world today. So Paul and Sarah are both members of our expert panel. They work together to create our position paper on learner agency. Paul is a senior learning technologist at Anglia Ruskin University. He's had 25 years of teaching experience, and he's an award-winning educational materials writer, a teacher trainer, and a graphic designer. Sarah Mercer is a professor of foreign language teaching at the University of Graz in Austria, where she's also the head of ELT methodology. She's an author, co-author, and co-editor of several of our books, including one of our most recent professional development books on teacher wellbeing. Really great read. So I'm in Oxford at the moment. I can see we've got people all over the world joining. Paul and Sarah, where are you joining us from today?
I'm in Austria, and it's a sunny day for a change. We've had terrible weather, and so finally we've got some sunshine today, just in time to share it with the rest of the world.
Oh, that's nice. We've had a sunny couple of days over here.
It's been great. I'm equally enjoying the sunshine just east of Cambridge in the UK.
Very nice, very nice. I think I might have a slight lag at the moment, so sorry about that if that comes through at all. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. So where is everyone else joining us from? If you're just logging into the stream now, we'd love to hear from you too. So please, again, let us know in the comments where you are and what you're up to. We're really glad to have you with us here today to answer all your questions on learner agency. So, as I said earlier, we recently launched a paper on this topic titled Learner Agency, Maximizing Learner Potential. It's filled with practical advice and guidance to help you promote learner agency in your classroom, and it advises you on how to give learners a sense of ownership and control over their learning, helping them feel more confident, active, and engaged. So if you want to download the paper, it's available on our website, and you can find a link to it in the comments down below. Anyone who downloads the paper will also receive a toolkit of exclusive resources to help you promote agency in your classroom. But for now, Sarah and Paul will be answering all our questions about learner agency. If you have any, just post them in the comments. I'll find them and read them out, and then they'll tell us what they think. So let's jump right in. For starters, Paul and Sarah, could you tell us a little bit about what learner agency is and why it's important?
Paul, do you want to start?
Thank you, Sarah. Well, Chris, I think you gave a very nice summary, because I think there's an easy answer and then there's a more complicated answer, which is obviously why we wrote a whole paper about it. The simple answer is agency is that feeling that you have of ownership and control, choice, a kind of determination, a feeling that you are determining your learning journey, a sense of responsibility for your learning, where you don't see it as something that's just external to yourself. You feel that you are in control of it. So that's more of like on a personal level. But then we also talk a lot about agency as an emergent property of context, and we talk about agency in the context of the classroom, and then agency in the teaching, agency that can be found in the interpretation of the course materials, in the curriculum, and then more broadly in the context of the culture that you're working in, or maybe in the particular policies of your school or educational establishment. So there's a small scale agency, and then there's a much more ecological view of what agency is. And Sarah, do you want to talk about why agency is important?
You billed me for that. So So I love the way that you described that the agency comes out of that relationship between the personal, the sort of the feelings that you have, the sense of the beliefs that you have, and how that interacts with what opportunities you have in your environment and what opportunities you perceive. And the sense of agency, so it's a feeling that a person has that they are willing and able to take ownership and responsibility for their learning, that they can make a difference to what happens to them. And it's hugely important that learners have a feeling of agency, not only for their sense of engagement and motivation, but also when you empower learners with a sense of agency, if you help them to feel that they can make a difference to their learning, you're going to set them on their sort of more growth mindset for learning generally, but it also gives them competencies and a sense of confidence that they ideally are going to be able to transfer beyond the language classroom to other subjects, but also to other areas of their life where they feel empowered to have the confidence to take decisions, the confidence to try things out, that they feel able to make a difference to their learning, but also to other aspects of their life. I think that is important, that it's not just something very narrowly for the language classroom. It has much broader repercussions, I think. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That comment you made about growth mindset and how agency fuels a growth mindset, which in turn fuels that lifelong learning that is the ultimate goal, isn't it? We're not just interested in teaching students in the here and now. We're thinking about them, more broadly when they go out into the world and their ability to learn and adapt to new contexts, and how agency can empower them in that way. But it's also entangled with ideas of things like engagement, motivation, how invested a learner will feel in the outcomes of their learning and in the process of their learning. So it's all of those things sort of wrapped up. And it sounds complicated, and this is exactly why we needed a paper and wrote the paper, to try and unpack some of the entangled different concepts that surround agency.
That's really interesting. Thank you. You've also answered my next question, which was to go into a bit more detail of what learners gain from learner agency. So thank you for that. Hello from Vietnam. Hello, everyone. I think we've got more people joining us now.
Oh, wonderful.
Hello. Hi, Jolanta. So to jump to our next question, you've talked a lot about the value of learner agency, what learner agency is, why it's important, what our learners gain from it. I think one of the questions which jumps up, and which I imagine some of our audience are probably thinking, is what is the teacher's role in promoting agency? What does the teacher do to promote agency? How are they involved?
Sarah, do you want to lead on this one?
Yeah, I can do. So one of the sort of misunderstandings about learner agency is that as a teacher, you're handing over control to the learners, and that's not true. You never, as a teacher, are not in control, or you should never not be in control of what's happening in your classroom, ideally. They happen, ideally you're not ever. But it doesn't mean that you are controlling everything. There's a difference. So being in control of what happens in your classroom means that there will be times where you facilitate leadership from the learners, where you have a participatory democracy in which learners take the lead, in which they manage what's happening in the classroom. So for a teacher, you're always in control and directing what's happening, but it doesn't mean you control everything. Sometimes you want to hand over control to the learners and let them make decisions and let them make choices within the bounds of what you facilitate as a teacher. So the role of the teacher is, as always, teachers are designers of learning experiences. So teachers design the conditions that create or maximize learning opportunities in the classroom. And sometimes that is very teacher-fronted, and sometimes it's more learner-centered and learner-directed. And the teacher, a teacher has a whole palette, a whole repertoire of strategies to draw from. And as a teacher, sometimes you need to be more controlling, and sometimes you're able to step back and let learners make the decisions for themselves. So I think and I'll come to the issue, perhaps I'll let Paul respond to this, and then we'll maybe come back to the issue of teacher wellbeing and teacher agency, because I think those are connected as well. So we do talk a little bit in the paper that there is a relationship between teacher agency and learner agency, of course. Paul, I don't know if that resonates with how you see it.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that the role of the teacher as a learning designer. So that's part of my job title, is I'm a learning technologist and learning designer, but it's in structuring learning, and knowing when to have a looser structure. So if your students are not used to being particularly agentic, if it's something you want to change in the way that you teach, or something that's come down from policymakers, it's not something you can just jump into. Different learners will need more scaffolding and more support to gradually start to recognize and feel more confident in, taking ownership of their learning. So it's definitely a flexible concept, and teachers' role as experts is to know their students, to understand the context, and to look at what kind of support that they need to provide and how they can gradually take away that support. It's a little bit like, when you're teaching a child to swim and they have armbands, and you gradually deflate them, so they're needing less and less support until they're fully in control of what they're doing and able to have that agency.
And I think that's an important point that you raise, is that as a teacher, your group and your students better than anybody. You're the expert in that setting. So where they are currently, and you always, with every kind of intervention or change or innovation that you want to bring in, you always have to start where they are. You start with the learner, and nobody knows your learners better than you. So you can decide what do you think they need. The best way to have that is have that dialogue with the learners, open that conversation with the learners, talk to them about how they see it, what you intend, why you'd like to do this, why you might want to try some activities that are a little bit more student-centered if it's unfamiliar. Be very explicit about that and give that space to have that dialogue and get the learners involved in that discussion. And start where they are, and you can take them gradually on a path of increasing amounts of agency.
I think another important role of the teacher is in the interpretation of policy and in the interpretation of the materials, because you may be working in an environment in which agency isn't a high priority consideration. It's not something that's been discussed. But as a teacher, you can look at the curriculum, you can look at the amount of time that you've got, you can look at the materials that you've got, and you can seek opportunities and design opportunities for agency within that box that you may be forced to operate within. So I think interpretation is another important aspect of that. And in order to interpret, and you yourself have to be aware of what agency is and how to exploit it, and so from a pedagogical perspective.
That's really interesting. Thank you both. I particularly liked what you said, Paul, about the armbands. And the fact that you're giving them that support early on with agency and then gradually taking it away. And I'm now wishing we put that in the position paper, because that's a really good one. We have some good metaphors in the position paper. But that's a really nice one. I really like that.
That's how I learned to swim.
That's also how I learned to swim. Okay, that's really interesting. I think you've made some really interesting points there about the role of the teacher. I was wondering if you could maybe give us some more examples of specific practices and specific ways that teachers can promote agency. What sorts of things can they do in the classroom? I think, Sarah, you mentioned the classroom being a bit more democratic. What sorts of practices does this type of thing involve?
So, I mean, I think one of the ways that we talk about this, and it's a very familiar phrase. It's not, it's not my phrase. It's just used widely. Is this idea of choice and voice, and that what you want to do is you want to maximize for learners. You want to maximize the choices that they have, and also the opportunities to bring in their voice. So that is a lot about opening dialogue, and it can be very little things. So if you feel, for example, that you've got very little option for promoting high agency in your classroom, you will certainly have some option. Let's say you have a course book and you've got they've got a set of role plays. Let the learners choose which 2 out of the 5 they want to do. It's a small thing, but that sense of ownership and choice, that the learner knows that they had some influence on that decision, really impacts on their sense of investment and their willingness to engage. So maximizing those opportunities where learners can make decisions about their learning, where they can make choices about the processes of learning, but also the output of learning, whether they choose to do I don't know, they decide to do something in the form of a poem, or they want to do something in the form of a song, or so we can choose to give them that kind of choice in how they do things, but also in sort of what they do as well. There's those two sort of angles you can take on that kind of choice. And voice is about asking learners for feedback, asking them how they feel about things that they want to do. Are they willing to do it in this way? Explaining to learners why they want to do things in a certain manner. So opening up that dialogue, making it much more of an open conversation, making decisions also transparent. I think that's a big part of that democratizing, and also treating learners with that kind of trust and respect that opens up the relationship between teacher and learner, I think.
That's really interesting. I think you touched on a really interesting point there as well when you were talking about how you can give small amounts of choice or larger amounts of choice, and you can suit it to the learner, where agency is very much a continuum, I think. And I suppose that also applies to different levels of student as well. So whether it's primary or secondary or adult.
Yeah, Paul,
did you have any?
Continue? Sorry, Chris.
Yeah,
That's all right.
I mean, I don't think any particular level on that spectrum is specific to the age of a learner. I mean, you can have highly agentic young learners and mature learners who may have a history of learning a language in a particular way in which they've been more spoon-fed, or it's been sort of more it's been more linear, and they haven't had a lot of control over it. So it's not something that's age specific. But I mean, I think definitely what Sarah was saying about allowing, giving students an element of choice, and asking for feedback, making your teaching a dialogic rather than sage on the stage. I think other things like making the learning personally meaningful to the students, which asking them for their contributions. So you may well have your teacher set language goals for a particular lesson or for a particular unit in the course material, but why not ask the learners what their personal goals, what they would like to improve during that particular lesson, or what they would like to find out more about in a particular lesson. Other things is just seeing students as content creators as well as consumers. We forget that side of things very often. We're provided with an abundance of ready-made materials, but there are often gaps within that where you can get students to create their own version of something, or using some digital media, creating videos, creating podcasts, doing things where they're collaborating, communicating, and they have that sense of ownership over it because they're putting in some of their own personally meaningful interpretations into it. So more open-ended approach to teaching, I think, is definitely a key aspect of that.
That's really interesting. I think as well, you both mentioned a lot of different practices and possibilities here. One thing that I want to mention is we mentioned a few of these in our position paper itself. So I believe it's around page 9 or 10 on the paper. There's a big table, and it contains a bunch of different practices that can promote agency. And it has examples of low agency practice and high agency practices and how you can use them together to promote agency. So if you want more examples of the sorts of things Sarah and Paul have been talking about, and more examples used in your practice, or you just want something written down, you can download the paper on our website, and it will give you a bunch of practical examples.
I think what's important to stress, and that I'd really like. Sorry, I know.
No, go on. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, what is important to understand is this idea of the continuum of low agency teaching and high agency teaching. And it's not to suggest that only high agency is all the time or the best way or the only way to do it. Because we understand it as a continuum of lower agency practices and higher agency practices. As a teacher, when we talked before about the fact that you have that palette of options that you choose from, you will move along that continuum, and sometimes you're able to engage in more high agency practices, and sometimes it isn't a judgment set. It's the fact that some approaches will be more agency promoting, and some of them will be less agency promoting, and it depends on your purpose and the type of activities and the kind of context you're teaching in and the experiences your learners already have. So I think understanding agency and agency enhancing teaching along that continuum can be a useful concept to think about, that you move along that depending on your needs and your learners' needs.
That's really interesting. I think that's a very good point. We have our first question from the audience, actually. This one's from Jessica. And Jessica is asking, as teachers, how do we measure or observe our learners' agency? and that self-report instruments can be misleading, and they're and that you can't always tell if a learner's engaged. So how can you tell if a learner's being agentic?
Hi, Jessica. I was going to write to you this morning, actually, Han. It's nice to see you. I was going to write to you this morning. I just haven't got around to it yet, but I'll write to you later instead. But I will answer the question, I promise. So yes, so I think one of the big issues is that when learners fake engagement or fake agency, they're usually engaged in some form of compliance. And that's not what authentic or agentic teaching is about. We're not into trying to get people to comply. But remember, it is choosing to exercise your agency when you choose not to take part in something. So, for example, if a learner says, it might not be the desired response you wish for as a teacher, but if you set up an activity and a learner says, I don't want to do that, they're exercising their agency in refusing to do an activity. And the next step is then to find out why they don't want to do that and what the reasons are inhibiting them from engaging. So there's a difference between engagement and agency, is that they may not wish to engage, they may not choose to engage, but they are maybe exercising their agency in not doing that. And it would then the question is to understand why. So agency is not just about, and this is important that what Jessica asked is so helpful, agency is not just what you can see, agency is also how you think and feel. So agency does reflect your beliefs, your emotions, your sense of volition. And I think that's why it's such an important question is it's not just about seeing compliant behavior. That's not what agency is, and learners just doing what they expected to do. Compliance is also not authentic engagement or authentic agency. But agency is not just visible behaviors. Agency is about that sense of ownership, that sense of responsibility, and the sense of control that you have about that. And so you might exercise that by choosing not to do the activity, which I realize is not the desired response that you want, but still it's that then you in some ways may have the opportunity for a real authentic engagement with the learner where you find out why that they do not want to engage, and that opens the opportunity for dialogue to understand the situation better. Paul, do you want to add to that anything?
Yeah, I just think, it is really a really important point to make, that you cannot tell somebody to be agentic. You can, in the same way that you can't tell somebody to be happy. You can say cheer up, but the chances of that suddenly make, okay, yes, I'll cheer up and I'll be happy now. So it is something that we talk about in the paper, is you having to take a multi-pronged approach. So we talk about creating enabling conditions. And I think one of the metaphors that I use, or more of an analogy, is to think about a chessboard and how a chessboard affords exactly the same opportunities for agency to a grandmaster as it does to a novice, but the novice just isn't aware of those, of the different levels of agency, that they're sort of hidden and unveiled. And as teachers, what we can do is create the conditions to highlight the opportunities for agency and encourage students to take those opportunities. And if they don't, then make that a part of the discussion as well, like why they've chosen not to. And that could very well be a really interesting learning experience in and of itself.
I'm really jealous of your ability to use all these metaphors. I just can't, my brain just doesn't work like that. And these are lovely. I love all these metaphors. They're brilliant.
I know I really like those. There's some good ones in the paper as well. There's one about a canoe which works really well. I just wanted to say, before we move on to the next question, we've got a bunch of new people in the chat by the looks of things, a bunch of new people watching. I just wanted to say hi and welcome to everyone. If you have any questions about learner agency that pop to mind, please do pop them in the chat. I'll pull them out, and then Sarah and Paul can answer them. So if you have any questions or anything, just drop them down below, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. Sorry, did you? I have another question which we can jump to. Did you have anything else that you wanted to say on that? I kind of interrupted there.
No, let's dive in.
Okay, fantastic. So this is another question from Viet, and he's asked, when we start a lesson and we have a certain syllabus to cover, how can we make the syllabus more meaningful for students? So, I think that is a really interesting question, because teachers do have a curriculum and a syllabus they need to cover. You often need to teach and prepare students for an exam. So how do you promote agency alongside this? How do you give students that choice alongside the syllabus that you need to do?
Yeah, well, I think one of the key things is to find out what students already know about a subject, because you may have a syllabus, but that doesn't mean to say you have to blindly plod through it, when students may already know a certain amount about the subject and have a particular viewpoint on that subject that you can use as a springboard to personalize that learning, and as an opportunity to let them take ownership of it by communicating that, by debating that. So I think that's definitely one way that you can look at interpreting the curriculum. So, Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Teachers, fundamentally, that's what we do, isn't it? I mean, our job is to mediate between the constraints that exist in our environment, whether it's the syllabus or the institutional rules or time constraints, and to mediate that to enable learning. So it's kind of fundamental to what we do as teachers in any context. Finding opportunities to help learners make connections, give them choice, get them to discuss how they would improve the coursebook. If they don't like a coursebook that they're working with, what would they do differently? Have they got better questions that they would want to ask? Can they think of a new way of doing the role play? So there's always capacity to adapt and change without, it's not about having to design brand new materials. And I think this is something Paul and I spoke about before that we would like to stress, is to teach in a way that fosters and promotes learner agency doesn't mean designing brand new materials and doing full-blown projects. It can be small changes to your practice. It's about looking at what you already do and looking at maybe the course book or the syllabus or whatever it is that's defining in your context, and saying, what kind of changes can I make here to get the learners to play a bigger role in deciding how we do it, or give them some choice and voice, get them to find a personal connection to the topic, get them to find a way they'd like to express themselves, get them to choose what kind of feedback procedures they would like. So they can be small things, and it's a lot to do with our attitude and opening ourselves to that dialogue with learners and giving them the space and the responsibility and options to take ownership. And that doesn't mean brand new projects and complete new materials. And I think that's what's exciting about talking about agency, is we can do very small things in our practice that lead to big effects. And I think that's what's quite exciting about talking about agency.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I just to add to that. Sorry, Chris. I was just going to say, just to add to that. I think bringing in different media. So you may well have something in the course book about climate change, but you may find an infographic that presents something slightly differently, or presents a different worldview, or it looks at it from an economics perspective rather than from a global warming perspective, or it looks at it in the effects on a particular community. So I think there are all these different lenses that you can bring in to view the same core material, but from different angles. And I'm really interested in infographics, and I particularly like configurable infographics, where there are lots of them where they allow you to change some of the parameters and change some of the conditions, and then get some immediate feedback on, so what would happen if we if we continue, if we increase the rate of deforestation, how will that affect the amount of carbon that's produced? And you can see that and manipulate it, and then that can lead you to have a discussion about policies. So should we be doing more of this or less of that? And you can get students to gradually start seeing the world in a more complicated way, where things are not just linear and simple and boxed into their own subjects, but they're interconnected, and you've got opportunities to maybe communicate and collaborate with colleagues and do an interdisciplinary project where you're not necessarily having to write new materials, but based on using your materials as a springboard, you can create a project. And just one example I can think of that I did with my own students is when we had a typical unit about pollution, and noise pollution was mentioned just as as in passing. So I got my students to use their smartphones, download a free decibel recording app, and measure the levels of sound pollution at different points in the day, in their back garden or in their neighborhood or from their balcony, and then bring all of that data back in, and then create a sound map of the town that they lived in, and find out which areas had the most noise pollution. And that wasn't me creating any new materials. It was the students using a device that they had with them to just make some recordings, collect some data, turning them into citizen scientists effectively. And then that led to really interesting discussions. We created the map in the classroom, and then we talked about policy and what could be done to reduce sound and what are the negative effects on health and that kind of thing. So you can start with something very, very simple that's provided to you on a plate in a course book, and then just think outside the box and get students to personalize it and engage with it through different lenses.
That's really interesting. I'm a big fan of that activity. That sounds like it was a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, it was.
So I wanted to actually jump on something that Sarah mentioned, which I think is actually a really important question. So Sarah, you briefly mentioned how when making decisions in the classroom, teachers have to take into account both the syllabus, but also the institution. And I thought that was really interesting, because we've talked a lot about teachers and how individual teachers can promote agency. But I think a really important question to ask is the role of other stakeholders, such as school leaders or policymakers or the wider school community. What's the role of the school at large in promoting agency?
So I think schools create a culture. Many of you will be familiar with the notion of, it's called the hidden curriculum. And the hidden curriculum is the idea that the kind of culture we create in schools through the way we behave as teachers, but also the way that the head of school, the way that other teachers, the way teachers interact with each other, the posters in the school, the letters that go home from schools to parents, how parents are integrated into school events. All of that creates a culture. And each school has its own set of socialization processes, and you can have more open cultures, which are more promoting for learner agency and also teacher agency, I should add, that enable people to take responsibility, make decisions, feel invested, feel that they have some input in the process. So, it's very simple things. Does a school have a decision-making board that includes student representatives from different phases in the school, for example? So there's a whole culture in a school, this hidden curriculum that we communicate about how we respect, how we trust, how we want to empower learners. And that's communicated through a whole range of policies in school, opportunities that are given to learners to be part of decision-making processes, the spaces students are given to make their own, to communicate their own personalities through artwork or through being able to design classrooms and so on. So I think that's a massive part of facilitating an atmosphere that is conducive to agency, is when the whole school takes that culture and that attitude on board, and it's communicated through multiple channels.
I think actually there's an interesting, Viet has come back in response to Aristo's previous question, and he said it sounds like promoting agency moves beyond just language lessons, which I think is interesting, because I think that does build on what you've been saying, where it's not just about language teachers, language lessons. It really is a cross-curricular, whole school approach a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that definitely agency just so happens to facilitate language learning, but on a much broader scale, we are talking about developing a trait almost. It's something that you internalize, and it's not. I mean, just to use a long word, it's not an ontological. It's not about being a person with agency. It's always about becoming. It's always this lifelong process of feeling empowered, having this growth mindset, as Sarah mentioned right at the start. Task-based learning is a vehicle, I think, that is conducive to promoting learner agency, but learner agency is much broader and much bigger as a concept than that particular approach of task-based learning. But it's definitely, inquiry-based learning, problem-based learning, task-based learning are definitely approaches that I would recommend as being conducive to fostering learner agency. Would you agree, Sarah?
Yeah, so I was going to say, I don't think we're talking about things that are massively different to what teachers already do. So when we know what is it that promotes motivation, what helps learners to be engaged in class, that's not just language specific, that's in education generally. And so those are things where I think many teachers will already be using various strategies. I don't think there's any teacher in this room now who sits here and when they're doing their lesson planning doesn't think, is this going to be motivating for learners? Are they going to enjoy this? Is this going to be fun? How are they going to respond to that? Because that's part of what we do as teachers, and that's not always language specific. Some of those decisions are based on general educational principles, and I think learner agency is one of those general educational principles that is important in all kinds of learning, but it's particularly important in the language classroom, where we depend on learners being active. It's skill based. So learning and using a language is something where learners need to be active. If you've heard it before for languages, if you use it or lose it. So if we're not promoting this active engagement and facilitating learners feeling that they want to use opportunities to use the language, then we're falling short. So I think it's a great question, because I think this is a fundamental educational principle that has a particular role to play in the language classroom. And I'm going to pick up on something that's also sort of hidden in Viet's comment, which I think is great, and links to also that Paul was talking about citizen science and digital literacy and so on. That obviously we have the global skills paper, if I can just deposit that.
Yeah.
You want me to just link to that? So we, OUP have also got a global skills paper. And one of the things that we've also argued in this other paper that's available is that when learners are agentic and when they develop these other skills which are easily incorporated into the language classroom, like digital literacy, these are opportunities for learners to show their ability to engage with things, to develop other competencies. And I don't think there are always clear, neat boundaries. I think that language learning is very open to the promotion of other skills and competencies alongside learning a language at the same time. And it's natural that a lot of those approaches will, and particularly project-based learning, task-based learning, more inquiry-based approaches, will foster agency. That's fundamentally what they're about as pedagogical approaches.
I think the transparency that you mentioned earlier, Sarah, when you talked about, sort of being upfront about what you're doing is really crucial with those approaches, whether it's task-based or inquiry-based. If students don't have a history of learning in that way, they may well say, well, where are the worksheets? I'm not learning anything because I don't have, some flashcards or some grammar tables that I can memorize for the test. And so I think transparency is extremely important. The students need to understand, not just what they're doing, but why they're doing it, and what is the rationale for the teacher choosing to present a task in a particular way, and then that gives them the opportunity to respond to that and agree or disagree, or at least internalize it. But on the level of school leaders, I think another thing Sarah was talking about, sort of it's much broader. It's not just about language, but a school leader may have that bird's eye view where they can take a step back and see what's going on in terms of agency within the school, and then encourage teachers to share, create some sort of forums or community, encourage the teachers to share examples of good practice in promoting agency, and get some interdisciplinary collaboration going within the school environment. I think that's very useful.
That's a nice idea.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. Okay, to move us on, I think we've got one more question. I think this one's interesting because it's quite specific, and it's from Anjay. And Ajay is asking, what factors in a learning environment are essential to developing learner agency in young learners specifically? Oh, we've lost Paul. Well, Sarah, I'm going to put you on the spot until Paul gets back.
That's my question, will it?
That's your question now. Oh, wait, we might have Paul back. We have Paul back. There we go. We have Paul back. Okay. You're not on your own.
I elbow closed a tab. That was my fault. Sorry about that, everyone.
You sure you didn't hear the question and think, right, I'm going to leave Sarah to answer that one?
No, I caught the question. I just caught the question there.
So yes, developing agency in young learners.
Oh, I have to confess I'm not an expert on young learners, so I don't know, Paul, if you've got more experience with young learners than I have, if you want to talk about that, because that's not a huge amount of experience with young learners, but I think definitely one of the things that can be done is have a playful approach to learning, reduce the stakes of failure and encourage positive failure. So people only, you typically focus on success, getting the right answer,
but failing frequently and failing, rapidly, getting feedback on that, and then failing again, sort of, going into failing with gusto, I think is at the heart of playful learning, where you try something out and you're promoting that curiosity and encouraging students to follow that, and not and rewarding failure as much as anything else, where people will try again. And I think that's one of the key mechanics of agency, is to not attribute failing to any kind of intrinsic personal quality. And especially with younger learners, you don't want them to come home from school saying, I am not a person who's good at I'm not good at maths, I am not good at English, and see that as something that is a permanent trait of themselves. I'm just not good at it. You want them to say, well, I had, it was really difficult today, but tomorrow my teacher has said, we're going to do this again, and we're going to try it like this, and get them to enjoy that process of learning through trial and error and failing, and reducing the stakes of that. So I think that's a key element. But as I said, I'm not an expert in teaching young learners.
I think that's good advice for any context. To be fair, I think it's good advice generally. I think one of the things that I would also say is, and it's related to what Paul said, is creating a sense of psychological safety. So psychological safety means that learners feel safe in the environment. They're not going to be laughed at. They can make mistakes. They can take risks. That they've got good relationships. And that's why I think, but I mean, like I say, I don't think this is particularly just young learners, but maybe they're more sensitive to it, that the social emotional climate of the classroom is so important to strengthen that sense of psychological safety, and particularly because using a foreign language for everybody, but also for you're putting yourself out there and you're restricted and you need to feel safe. And I think that's quite important.
I think that brings us on to actually an important point, Sarah, which is I believe you wanted to talk about a little bit about the relationship between agency and well-being.
I did. I'd forgotten that I did, but I did. For me, the two are really closely connected. That and it works both ways. If you have high agency, learners are going to enjoy their learning more. They're going to have a higher sense of well-being. They'll be more motivated. Learning will be playful, will be fun. So I think if you are developing high agency classrooms, that does contribute positively to learner well-being in the classroom and learner sense of positivity in the classroom. But equally, if you foster in learners a higher sense of well-being, if they have higher sense of well-being, they are more confident to take risks. They have more energy, quite literally, to try out things, to be willing to take responsibility, to wanting to be proactive in their learning. They're also going to feel a sense of growth and positivity about trying out new avenues, exploring things. So the two, for me, well-being and agency are very tightly connected. In fostering agency, you strengthen well-being, and having high well-being, you create optimal conditions for a learner to exercise their agency. And obviously, I feel the same way for teachers. I think the same conditions apply for teacher agency and teacher well-being.
That's really interesting. We've actually got, as well as our big position paper on learner agency, we've got a smaller focus paper on student agency, which, Sarah, I believe you wrote.
Student well-being, yes, and I did.
Sorry, not student agency. Sorry, yes, student well-being.
Related.
Yes, we have a as well as the big position paper on learner agency, we have a small focus paper on student well-being, which Sarah wrote. It's about 4 or 5 pages. It's available on our website. I believe the link is in the comments. And that it provides some really interesting insights on how to promote student agency. Sarah has also written a book. It's a student agency, student well-being. Sorry, I've got my agency hat on. Sarah's also written a book on teacher well-being, which is also available on our website. Really great book. So if you want to look at well-being as well, we also offer resources on that. But yes, I think we've answered everyone's questions regarding agency and well-being now. So I think, and we've been going about 45 minutes. So I think we've reached the end. But thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you in particular to you, Sarah and Paul. You've been fantastic. It's been really great having you. And yeah, it's been a fun live stream, and you've given us all, I think, some really useful advice.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
No
Yeah,
worries.
thank you, Chris. That was wonderful. Thanks everyone for coming along today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So if you're watching this today and you want more expert advice to help you promote learner agency, you can download our position paper on learner agency maximizing learner potential by following the link in the comments down below. It contains loads of practical tips to help you promote learner agency in the classroom, and anyone who downloads it will also receive a toolkit of free classroom resources via email to help you promote agency directly in your classroom. So if you watched this live stream today and you liked it, make sure you like it. If you loved it, make sure you love it. Please do share it as well. If you know any teachers that need this in their life, then tag them in the comments. This really does help us out. So make sure you're following us for future updates. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. We are at OUPELT Global. We have more sessions just like this one on the way to you very soon. In fact, we want to make these sessions all about you. So let us know in the comments what you'd like us to talk about next. If you have a particular topic or issue that you would like to know more about, let us know, and we'll think about it when we're planning our next session. But last but not least, a huge thank you to Paul and Sarah for joining us today. Thank you so much for your insights. We learned an awful lot. And yeah, it was really great having you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone else for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the session. And yeah, we hope you had fun. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.